Things off with the don't ask, don't tell policy. It's been one of the most debated headlines, grabbing stories from quite some time now, with the government going back and forth on whether or not the act should be repealed. Well, recently, history was made as the government elected to repeal the controversial policy. Those who voted against the repeal believe it'll hurt our military system. And our first guest today is going to dig a little bit deeper into this discussion, as well as some stories making international and national headlines. As always, we welcome to the show attorney, professor at SUNY Maritime, and political analyst Mark Meirowitz to the show. And Mark, good to have you.
Good morning. How
Good
are you?
I'm good to have you. As we
Terrific to be here.
Yes, as we talked in the onset, don't ask, don't tell. We know that this is the historic vote that went. It took a while to get here, and still we do know that there's still a lot of dissatisfaction.
Well, the question is the implementation of it and whether or not it can be successfully implemented. First of all, the president made this a hallmark of his campaign promises to repeal Don't Ask, Don't Tell. In hearings that were held in the Senate, a number of the chiefs of the various armed services expressed some concerns about how this would be implemented and also what would be the impact of this policy on the active combat troops and how that could be integrated, especially at a time when the United States is at war in two significant theaters. So even though it looks like right now that the Senate has passed a major procedural hurdle, overcome a Republican issue, and they're going to move ahead to have it passed. Then after that, the president will sign it, I think actually probably going to be today, if I understand correctly. And then it goes into the implementation stage, and that's where it's going to be, to see the sort of the proof is in the pudding.
When you talk about the fact that the president is going to sign this into law today, many people are saying, yes, it is going to still be a wait-and-see policy, because when you talk about implementation, what do you view as some of the major hurdles with implementation?
Well, the chiefs, particularly the Marine Chief of Staff that spoke at the hearing, and Senator McCain, has spoken about the question of cohesion in combat units and whether this would interrupt or interfere with combat unit cohesion. And the Marines are a very close-knit organization. And the Chief of Staff of the Marines expressed the view that he was concerned that implementing this policy could upset that balance, that delicate balance, because the Marines are very tight together. And so that tight-knit aspect of their cohesion could be interrupted. Of course, the Senate appears not to agree with that. Senator McCain was very emphatic in his opposition. Remember, Senator McCain was in combat. He was a prisoner of war. He knows a little bit about what he's speaking about. And by the way, I wanted to mention that while the Don't Ask, Don't Tell was repealed, the DREAM Act, died a legislative death. That was the law that was going to allow young people who go to college or join the military to receive immigration status as citizens, and that actually failed. And that was very, very, I think, unfortunate that didn't go through. So there have been winners and there have been losers in this lame duck session. This one, as you say, is the implementation is going to show, are the chiefs of staff correct about their combat unit cohesion, or are they wrong? Hopefully, there was a survey done of troops out in the field, and many troops expressed the view they would work hard to make this work. And and in America, we work together, we're diverse, and we can make things happen. So hopefully this will happen in a successful way.
True. Speaking of winners and losers, one person says, listen, lately the president was a loser, considering the fact that he had all of these hurdles going into the midterm elections, seeing the results of the midterm elections and the GOP coming back, but being able to work across party lines and get some things done. It seems as though in some people's eyes, he's looking like a winner again.
President Obama is one of the great politicians of our time. Even when he seems to be down and out, he can pull out a couple of extraordinary victories. He pulled out the Don't Ask, Don't Tell victory. He also pulled out, it appears, the START victory. He wants that new START treaty to be ratified. And he's pushed hard for it, and it looks like it's going to happen. So he's been a winner, I think you're right. He took a shellacking. This is the president's own term for what happened, but maybe he had kind of a sobering reflection on it, and he said, this is what I need to do, these are my agenda items, I'm going to make it happen, and he showed leadership. He's the president. That's what he should be doing, and he did it.
Talk to us a little bit about the lame duck house taking up the American genocide resolution.
Yes. The issue is it's actually happening today. It's very interesting because the Armenian genocide resolution, which paints or terms Turkey as having committed genocide in Armenia in 1915, was approved by the House Committee on Foreign Affairs in April, in March actually. And the president issued a statement in April about it. The bill went away, it disappeared. And now suddenly, like Houdini, some magical thing happened and it's back. But it's only back at the end, the last minutes of the lame duck session. And what's happening actually today is a pitched battle between the Turkish-American community and the Armenian-American community. The Armenian-American community wants this to be passed. The Turkish-American community wants it not to even come to the floor. And the question is, will Speaker Pelosi, who is now in her last minutes as Speaker of the House, stop this bill from coming to the floor or allow it to come to the floor and be voted on? Now, by the way, this Armenian resolution is a non-binding resolution. Nevertheless, it would send a very negative signal to our ally Turkey, and the Turkish government, the Turkish leadership has expressed to the U.S. government its strong opposition to this. The Turks and the Armenians agreed on what was called a protocol, and that protocol said that they would set up a historical commission to investigate these matters, issue a report. This was a negotiated agreement on the part of the two countries. That's where this issue belongs, in the historical commission. It does not belong in the House Committee on Foreign Affairs. It does not belong in the U.S. Congress, because as far as I know, the U.S. Congress is not a university of historians. It's politicians. And this is not a very good political issue for U.S.-Turkish relations, for U.S. Mideast issues. It's just going to upset the apple cart, and to what end? For nothing good will come of it. So I'm hopeful. As we speak right now, the phones are ringing off the hook, I assure you, in the U.S. Congress and Pelosi's office, as all of the groups are trying to do, which is the American way, to push for their point of view. Nevertheless, lame duck Congress means lame duck. There's a reason for why that has a term. That Congress is going out of office. A new Congress is coming in. This is not the time or the place to bring this up in the last minute, in the literally in the midnight before Christmas and the holidays.
Talk to us about the U.S. government. Much are mourning the loss of Richard Holbrooke.
Yes.
What does Richard Holbrooke talk about the significance of Richard Holbrooke?
This is very interesting issue. Richard Holbrooke was the chief negotiator for Pakistan and Afghanistan, and he very regretfully passed away. He was one of the great diplomats of the United States Diplomatic Corps. And as he was being operated on, he had a Pakistani doctor, and he spoke to this doctor and said to him, and this is literally his last words, I'm paraphrasing, we have to get out of Afghanistan. And everybody from the State Department spokesman to every commentator in the world is trying to interpret, what did these words mean? What were his last words? Did he know that these were his last words? Did he want to send a message? This is spinning the last words of somebody before they pass away. First of all, I think that's totally inappropriate. But secondly, what does it really mean? We don't know. How can we possibly know what it means? But Richard Holbrooke, his words have meaning. They have import. He was a very important negotiator. He negotiated the Dayton Accords on Bosnia. He was in Vietnam. In fact, something I just read, he wrote part of the Pentagon Papers. And the Pentagon Papers, if you remember years ago, which were read on the Senate floor by Senator Gravel, were classified documents that basically said the United States erred, it made a mistake in Vietnam, and it was also announcing to the public that we were winning in Vietnam when we were not winning in Vietnam. So it's very telling that the writer of the Pentagon Papers is saying, as his last words, let's get out of Afghanistan. So there's a lot to these words, but on the other hand, to spin them and try to analyze them and to make them politically meaningful for one side or the other is a little touchy, in my opinion, and a little quite inappropriate.
Considering the fact that the person's dead.
That's right. And so we can't ask him what he meant. But people recognize his legacy as a great diplomat. People from President Clinton to President Obama recognize the unique diplomatic skills and energy of this individual, extraordinary individual. He will be much missed. He's much needed in this effort, because the United States is having a very, very hard time in Afghanistan. There's no question about it. But whether that means we have to get out or not get out, that's a question of the presidential policy and not the interpretation or the spin on someone's words that, as you said, Daren, we just don't know for sure.
Before we break this down, there is some news coming out of Venezuela.
Yes, yes. Very interestingly, Hugo Chavez, the leader of Venezuela, has now gotten a decree that basically allows him to rule in effect without the legislature. And there's been a lot of concern about Venezuela. Number one, the economy in Venezuela is hurting. Secondly, Chavez keeps adding on to his powers. And this is very disturbing because human rights in Venezuela are literally under the thumb of this individual and his caprices or his feelings one way or the other. He has had vendettas against other countries' leaders. He has ratcheted up the tension in the area tremendously, and mostly in an anti-American fashion. He has forged relationships with countries that are not exactly friendly with the United States, like Iran and Cuba. And he molds himself really in the image of Castro, and he's extremely friendly with Ahmadinejad in Iran. And that's in Latin America. As far as I recollect, the United States had something called the Monroe Doctrine, and there was also a Roosevelt corollary to that. And as far as I know, Russians, Iranians, and all sorts of other elements that are outside Latin America, it's not helpful to stability in Latin America to have these elements coming to Venezuela, yet Chavez has encouraged them. Now what he's doing is he's adding to his power. He had passed actually a referendum. He tried to get a complete power over the country. He didn't win that. Then he won another referendum, which basically allowed him to continue to serve on a 10-year basis, unless and to continue to serve, sort of like unlimited term limits. And what happened was when he lost the first referendum, amazingly, all over Venezuela, billboards appeared that said, "Por ahora." I lost now, but por ahora. For now, I lost. But eventually, I'm going to take over. I'm going to be the dictator. And in fact, with this latest decree, Chavez shows that he's all into personal power. And that can't be good for human rights, and it can't be good for Latin America, I don't think.
All right, Mark Meirowitz, thank you so much for joining us and giving us the latest
My pleasure.
on national and international. Mark, all right.